Chapter 1. Playing Pilgrims. "Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents," grumbled Joe, lying on the rug. "It's so dreadful to be poor," sighed Meg, looking down at her old dress. "I don't think it's fair for some girls to have plenty of pretty things, and other girls nothing at all," added little Amy, with an injured sniff. "We've got father and mother, and each other," said Beth contentedly from her corner. The four young faces on which the firelight shone brightened at the cheerful words, but darkened again as Joe said sadly, "We haven't got father, and shall not have him for a long time." She didn't say perhaps never, but each silently added it, thinking of father far away, where the fighting was. Nobody spoke for a minute, then Meg said in an altered tone, "You know the reason Mother proposed not having any presents this Christmas was because it is going to be a hard winter for everyone, and she thinks we ought not to spend money for pleasure, when our men are suffering so in the army. We can't do much, but we can make our little sacrifices, and ought to do it gladly. But I am afraid I don't," and Meg shook her head, as she thought regretfully of all the pretty things she wanted. "But I don't think the little we should spend would do any good. We've each got $1, and the army wouldn't be much help by our giving that. I agree not to expect anything from Mother or you, but I do want to buy Undine and Cintron for myself. I've wanted it so long," said Joe, who was a bookworm.
第一、巡礼遊び。プレゼントのないクリスマスなんか、クリスマスじゃないわ。と、ジョーは敷物の上に寝そべって不平そうに言いました。貧乏って本当に嫌ね。と、メグは自分の着古した服を見ながらため息をつきました。ある少女がいいものをたくさん持ち、ある少女がちっとも持たないなんて不公平だと思うわ。と、小さいエミーは鼻を鳴らしながら言いました。でもね、私たちはお父さんもお母さんもあるし、こうして姉妹があるんだもの、いいじゃないの。と、ベスが炭の方から満足そうに言いました。ストーブの火に照らし出された4つの若々しい顔は、この快活な言葉で生き生きと輝きましたが、ジョーが悲しそうに。だって、お父さんは従軍曹で戦争に行ってお留守だし、これからも長いことお目にかかれないと思うわ。と言ったとき、またもや暗い影に覆われ、誰もしばらく口を聞きませんでした。けれど、やがてメグが調子を変えて、お母さんが今年のクリスマスはプレゼントなしとおっしゃったのは、みんな暮らしが辛くなるし、兵隊さんたちが戦争に行っているのに、楽しみのためにお金を使うのはいけないとお考えになったからよ。私たち、大したことはできないけど、少しの犠牲は払えるし、喜んで払うべきだわ。でも、私、払えるかしら。メグは、欲しいものを犠牲にするのが惜しいというように頭を振りました。だけど、私たちの$1を献金したって、大して兵隊さんの役に立つとは思えないわ。私はお母さんやあなた方から、プレゼントがもらえないのはいいとして、自分でアンデインとシントラムを買いたいわ。前から欲しかったんですもの。と、本の好きなジョーがそう言うと。
"I plan to spend mine in new music," said Beth, with a little sigh, which no one heard but the hearth brush and kettle holder. "I shall get a nice box of Faber's drawing pencils, I really need them," said Amy decidedly. "Mother didn't say anything about our money, and she won't wish us to give up everything. Let's each buy what we want, and have a little fun. I'm sure we work hard enough to earn it," cried Joe, examining the heels of her shoes in a gentlemanly manner. "I know I do, teaching those tiresome children nearly all day, when I'm longing to enjoy myself at home," began Meg, in the complaining tone again. "You don't have half such a hard time as I do," said Joe. "How would you like to be shut up for hours with a nervous, fussy old lady, who keeps you trotting, is never satisfied, and worries you till you're ready to fly out the window or cry? It's naughty to fret, but I do think washing dishes and keeping things tidy is the worst work in the world. It makes me cross, and my hands get so stiff, I can't practice well at all." And Beth looked at her rough hands with a sigh that anyone could hear that time. "I don't believe any of you suffer as I do," cried Amy, "for you don't have to go to school with impertinent girls, who plague you if you don't know your lessons, and laugh at your dresses, and label your father if he isn't rich, and insult you when your nose isn't nice. If you mean libel, I'd say so, and not talk about labels, as if Papa was a pickle bottle," advised Joe, laughing. "I know what I mean, and you needn't be statistical about it. It's proper to use good words, and improve your vocabulary," returned Amy, with dignity.
ベスはため息をつきながら、私は新しい本を買いたいわ。エミーも、きっぱりと、私、フェバーの上等の色鉛筆が欲しいわ。本当に私いるんですもの。と言いました。ジョーは、お母さんは、私たちのお金のこと、何にもおっしゃらなかったわ。だから、めいめい欲しいものを買って楽しみましょうよ。これだけのお金を儲けるのに、みんなずいぶん苦労したんだもの。と、紳士がやるように長靴のかかとを調べながら言いました。そうよ。ほとんど一日中あの厄介な子供たちの勉強を見てやるのたまらないわ。と、メグがまたも不平を言いますと、続いてジョーが、そんなこと私の半分の苦労じゃないわ。私は、神経痛で気難しいおばあさんに使われてさ。どんなにしてあげても気に入らなくて、いっそのこと窓から飛び出そうか。それとも、おばあさんの横っ面を張り飛ばしてやろうかと思うくらいよ。不平言ってもしょうがないけど、皿を洗ったりそこらを片付けたり、そんな家の中の仕事は、本当に嫌な仕事だわ。手がこわばって、ピアノ弾けないわ。ベスは大きなため息をついて、荒れた自分の手を見ました。すると、エミーも大声で言いました。あたしぐらい苦労しているものないわ。だって、あなたたちは勉強ができないと言っていじめたり、服がおかしいと言って笑ったり、お父さんが金持ちでないと言ったり、花の格好が悪いと言ってあざけったりする生意気な連中と一緒に学校に行かなくてもいいんですもの。
Don't beck at one another, children. Don't you wish we had the money Papa lost when we were little, Joe? Dear me. How happy and good we'd be, if we had no worries, said Meg, who could remember better times. You said the other day you thought we were a deal happier than the King children, for they were fighting and fretting all the time, in spite of their money. So I did, Beth. Well, I think we are. For though we do have to work, we make fun of ourselves, and are a pretty jolly set, as Joe would say. Joe does use such slang words, observed Amy, with a reproving look at the long figure stretched on the rug. Joe immediately sat up, put her hands in her pockets, and began to whistle. Don't, Joe. It's so boyish. That's why I do it. I detest rude, unladylike girls. I hate affected, niminy-biminy chits. Birds in their little nests agree, sang Beth, the peacemaker, with such a funny face that both sharp voices softened to a laugh, and the pecking ended for that time. Really, girls, you are both to be blamed, said Meg, beginning to lecture in her elder sisterly fashion. You are old enough to leave off boyish tricks, and to behave better, Josephine. It didn't matter so much when you were a little girl, but now you are so tall, and turn up your hair, you should remember that you're a young lady.
こうして、みんなが不平をぶちまけた挙句、メグが言いました。あたしたちの小さい時、お父さんのなくされたお金が今でもあったらいいと思わない。そうしたらどんなに幸福でしょう。すると、ベスが聞きとがめて言いました。こないだ姉さんは、キングさんのとこの子は、お金があってもいつも喧嘩したり怒ったりしてるから、あたしたちの方がずっと幸福だって言ったじゃないの。ええ言ったわ。あたしたちは働かなければならないけど、 ジョーの言うように楽しい相棒ですもの。ジョー姉さん、相棒だなんて存在な言葉だわ。と、エミーは、敷物の上に寝そべっているジョーの方を見て言いました。ジョーはすぐに起き直って、エプロンの隠しに両手を突っ込んで、口笛を吹き始めました。ジョー、およしなさい。まるで男の子みたい。だからあたしするの。あたし、下品な女らしくない子は大嫌い。あたし、気取り屋のおすまし、大嫌い。すると、仲裁者のベスがおどけ顔で、同じ小さな巣にいる小鳥、いつも仲良し争わぬ、と歌い出したので、二人の尖った声も笑い声となりましたが、メグが姉さんぶってお説教を始めました。二人ともいけないわ。それにジョーは、もう男の子みたいなおいたはやめて、しとやかになさいよ。背も高いし髪も言ってるのですもの。もう若い婦人だわ。
I'm not. And if turning up my hair makes me one, I'll wear it in two tails till I'm 20, cried Joe, pulling off her net, and shaking down a chestnut mane. I hate to think I've got to grow up, and be Miss March, and wear long gowns, and look as prim as a China aster. It's bad enough to be a girl, anyway, when I like boys' games and workin' manners. I can't get over my disappointment in not being a boy. And it's worse than ever now, for I'm dying to go and fight with Papa. And I can only stay home and knit, like a poky old woman. And Joe shook the blue army sock till the needles rattled like castanets, and her ball bounded across the room. Poor Joe. It's too bad, but it can't be helped. So you must try to be contented with making your name boyish, and playing brother to us girls, said Beth, stroking the rough head with a hand that all the dishwashing and dusting in the world could not make ungentle in its touch. As for you, Amy, continued Meg, you are altogether too particular and prim. Your airs are funny now, but you will grow up an affected little goose, if you don't take care. I like your nice manners and refined ways of speaking, when you don't try to be elegant. But your absurd words are as bad as Joe's slang. If Joe is a tomboy and Amy a goose, what am I, please? Asked Beth, ready to share the lecture. You're a dear, and nothing else, answered Meg warmly, and no one contradicted her, for the mouse was the pet of the family. As young readers like to know how people look, we will take this moment to give them a little sketch of the four sisters, who sat knitting away in the twilight, while the December snow fell quietly without, and the fire crackled cheerfully within. It was a comfortable room, though the carpet was faded and the furniture very plain, for a good picture or two hung on the walls, books filled the recesses, chrysanthemums and Christmas roses bloomed in the windows, and a pleasant atmosphere of home peace pervaded it.
そんなら20歳まで、お下げにしとくわ。あたし、男の子の遊び事や仕事や身なりが好きなのに、女に生まれてつまらないわ。この頃は、お父さんと一緒に、戦争がしたくてうずうずしてるのに、家にいてよぼよぼばあさんみたいに、編み物をしてるだけなんだもの。かわいそうな嬢姉さん。まあ名前でも男の子らしくして、あたしたちの兄さんになって、我慢しておくんだわね。ベスが慰めるように言いました。メグは、またお説教を続けました。それから、エミーは気難し屋で堅苦しいわ。今は可愛いけど、気をつけないと、大人になったらガチョウみたいに気取り屋さんになるわ。上品ぶらないときは、しとやかなのもいい言葉も好きだけど、あんたのませた言葉は、ジョーの下品な言葉と同じように良くないわ。ジョーがおてんばでエミーが気取り屋さんなら、姉さん、あたしはなーに。と、ベスは自分もお説教されたがって口を挟みました。あなたは可愛い子。ただそれだけよ。メグは優しくそう言いましたが、これには誰も反対しませんでした。ところで、皆さんはこの4人の姉妹がどんな人柄か知りたいでしょう。表には12月の雪が降り、家の中には楽しそうにストーブの火の燃えている夕暮れの薄闇の中で、編み物をしている4人姉妹をスケッチしてみましょう。その前に、部屋の様子を言えば、 敷物の色はサメ、家具類は質素ですが、壁には立派な絵が一つ二つ掛けられ、本棚にはぎっしりと本が並び、出窓には菊やバラが咲いています。古い部屋ですが、平和な家庭の和やかさが隅々にまで満ち渡っていました。
Margaret, the eldest of the four, was 16, and very pretty, being plump and fair, with large eyes, plenty of soft brown hair, a sweet mouth, and white hands, of which she was rather vain. 15-year-old Joe was very tall, thin, and brown, and reminded one of a colt, for she never seemed to know what to do with her long limbs, which were very much in her way. She had a decided mouth, a comical nose, and sharp, gray eyes, which appeared to see everything, and were by turns fierce, funny, or thoughtful. Her long, thick hair was her one beauty, but it was usually bundled into a net, to be out of her way. Round shoulders had Joe, big hands and feet, a flyaway look to her clothes, and the uncomfortable appearance of a girl who was rapidly shooting up into a woman and didn't like it. Elizabeth, or Beth, as everyone called her, was a rosy, smooth-haired, bright-eyed girl of 13, with a shy manner, a timid voice, and a peaceful expression which was seldom disturbed. Her father called her Little Miss Tranquility, and the name suited her excellently, for she seemed to live in a happy world of her own, only venturing out to meet the few whom she trusted and loved. Amy, though the youngest, was a most important person, in her own opinion at least. A regular snow maiden, with blue eyes, and yellow hair curling on her shoulders, pale and slender, and always carrying herself like a young lady mindful of her manners. What the characters of the four sisters were we will leave to be found out. The clock struck 6 and, having swept up the hearth, Beth put a pair of slippers down to warm. Somehow the sight of the old shoes had a good effect upon the girls, for Mother was coming, and everyone brightened to welcome her. Mick stopped lecturing, and lighted the lamp. Amy got out of the easy chair without being asked, and Joe forgot how tired she was as she sat up to hold the slippers nearer to the blaze.
長女のマーガレット、メグは16で、かわいい娘です。太って、目が大きく、飛び色の髪はふさふさとしており、口元が可愛く、自分でもいくらか得意の白い手をしています。15になるジョーは、背が高く、痩せて、小麦色の肌をして、すらりと長い手足を持て余している様子から、なんとなく子馬を思わせます。キリッとした口元、おどけた鼻、きつい灰色の目を持つ顔は、時には鋭くなり、時にはおどけ、時には思い深げになります。その長い豊かな髪は、優れて美しいけれど、いつも無造作にネットの中に束ねています。みんながベスと呼ぶエリザベスは、バラ色の血色の、癖のない髪の明るい目をした13の少女で、内気で穏やかですから、お父さんがひっそり姫という名をつけたのは、確かにうってつけでした。エミーは、一番下ですが、自分では一番大事な人物だと思っています。目は青く、縮れた金髪を肩まで垂らした、あどけない少女で、青白く、痩せて、いつも立ち居振る舞いに気をつける、若い貴婦人です。時計が6時を打ちました。ベスはストーブの周りを掃いて、スリッパを並べて温めました。やがて、お母さんのお帰りです。4人の顔に喜びが輝き、メグはお説教をやめてランプを灯しました。
They are quite worn out. Mommy must have a new pair. I thought I'd get her some with my dollar, said Beth. No, I shall, cried Amy. I'm the oldest, began Meg, but Joe cut in with a decided, I'm the man of the family now Papa is away, and I shall provide the slippers, for he told me to take special care of Mother while he was gone. I'll tell you what we'll do, said Beth, let's each get her something for Christmas, and not get anything for ourselves. That's like you. dear. What will we get? Exclaimed Joe. Everyone thought soberly for a minute, then Meg announced, as if the idea was suggested by the sight of her own pretty hands, I shall give her a nice pair of gloves. Army shoes, best to be had, cried Joe. Some handkerchiefs, all hemmed, said Beth. I'll get a little bottle of cologne. She likes it, and it won't cost much, so I'll have some left to buy my pencils, added Amy. How will we give the things? Asked Meg. Put them on the table, and bring her in and see her open the bundles. Don't you remember how we used to do on our birthdays? Answered Joe. I used to be so frightened when it was my turn to sit in the chair with the crown on, and see you all come marching round to give the presents, with a kiss. I liked the things and the kisses, but it was dreadful to have you sit looking at me while I opened the bundles, said Beth, who was toasting her face and the bread for tea at the same time.
すると、その古いスリッパが問題になりました。みんなが、自分が買ってお母さんにあげると言い張り、また一揉めそうでしたが、ベスが、みんなで、お母さんにクリスマスのプレゼントをあげましょうよ。自分のものは買わないで。と、言ったので、それはいい思いつきだということになり、あれこれ考えた挙句、メグは上等の手袋、ジョーは上等のスリッパ、エミーはヘリのついたハンカチ、ベスはコロン水の小瓶に決めました。
Let Mommy think we are getting things for ourselves, and then surprise her. We must go shopping tomorrow afternoon, Meg. There is so much to do about the play for Christmas night, said Joe, marching up and down, with her hands behind her back, and her nose in the air. I don't mean to act any more after this time. I'm getting too old for such things, observed Meg, who was as much a child as ever about dressing up frolics. You won't stop, I know, as long as you can trail round in a white gown with your hair down, and wear gold paper jewelry. You are the best actress we've got, and there'll be an end of everything if you quit the boards, said Joe. We ought to rehearse tonight. Come here, Amy, and do the fainting scene, for you are as stiff as a poker in that. I can't help it. I never saw anyone faint, and I don't choose to make myself all black and blue, tumbling flat as you do. If I can go down easily, I'll drop. If I can't, I shall fall into a chair and be graceful. I don't care if Hugo does come at me with a pistol, returned Amy, who was not gifted with dramatic power, but was chosen because she was small enough to be borne out shrieking by the villain of the piece. Do it this way. Clasp your hands so, and stagger across the room, crying frantically, Rodrigo. Save me. Save me. And away went Joe, with a melodramatic scream which was truly thrilling. Amy followed, but she poked her hands out stiffly before her, and jerked herself along as if she went by machinery, and her ow was more suggestive of pins being run into her than of fear and anguish. Joe gave a despairing groan, and Meg laughed outright, while Beth let her bread burn as she watched the fun with interest. It's no use. Do the best you can when the time comes, and if the audience laughs, don't blame me. Come on, Meg.
ジョーは背中に手を組み、天井を仰いで部屋を歩きながら言いました。お母さんには、私たちが自分のものを買っていると思わせておいて、びっくりさせてあげましょうよ。メグ。明日の午後に買い物に行かないと、クリスマスのお芝居のことですることがたくさんあるわ。すると、メグが言いました。あたし今度きりで、もうお芝居なんかしないつもりよ。あんなこと子供臭いもの。だって、姉さんは一番の役者ですもの。姉さんが抜けたらおしまいよ。エミー、さあ、いらっしゃい。お稽古しましょう。気を失うところをなさい。あんたは火箸みたいに硬くなるんだもの。仕方がないわ。気を失うとこなんか見たことないんですもの。こうやるのよ。手を組み合わせて。ロデリゴ、助けて。 助けて。と気違いみたいに叫びながらよろけて部屋を横切るの。ジョーは本当に悲鳴を上げてやってみせました。それに倣ってエミーもやりましたが、まるでぎこちなく、おう、という声だって、絶望どころか、体にピンでも刺さった時のようでした。ジョーががっかりしてうめくと、メグは笑い出すし、ベスもおかしがって、パンを焦がしてしまいました。お稽古しても無駄だわ。その時になって、できるだけになさい。見物が笑っても、あたしのせいにしては嫌よ。さあ、それでは、今度は姉さんよ。
Then things went smoothly, for Don Pedro defied the world in a speech of 2 pages without a single break. Hagar, the witch, chanted an awful incantation over her kettleful of simmering toads, with weird effect. Rodrigo rent his chains asunder manfully, and Hugo died in agonies of remorse and arsenic, with a wild, ha! Ha! It's the best we've had yet, said Meg, as the dead villain sat up and rubbed his elbows. I don't see how you can write and act such splendid things, Joe. You're a regular Shakespeare, exclaimed Beth, who firmly believed that her sisters were gifted with wonderful genius in all things. Not quite, replied Joe modestly. I do think the witch's curse, an operatic tragedy is rather a nice thing, but I'd like to try Macbeth if we only had a trapdoor for Banquo. I always wanted to do the killing part. Is that a dagger that I see before me? Muttered Joe, rolling her eyes and clutching at the air, as she had seen a famous tragedian do. No, it's the toasting fork, with Mother's shoe on it instead of the bread. Beth stage struck, cried Meg, and the rehearsal ended in a general burst of laughter. Glad to find you so merry, my girls, said a cheery voice at the door, and actors and audience turned to welcome a tall, motherly lady with a "Can I help you" look about her which was truly delightful. She was not elegantly dressed, but a noble-looking woman, and the girls thought the grey cloak and unfashionable bonnet covered the most splendid mother in the world. Well, dearies, how have you got on today? There was so much to do, getting the boxes ready to go tomorrow, that I didn't come home to dinner. Has anyone called, Beth? How is your cold, Meg? Joe, you look tired to death. Come and kiss me, baby.
それからは、すらすらと進行しました。ジョーのドンペデロは長いセリフをまくし立てて世をあざけり、魔女のハーガーは、ヒキガエルのいっぱい入った釜を覗いて呪文を唱え、ロデリゴは、惜しくも鉄の鎖を断ち切り、ユーゴーは毒を仰いで苦しみながら死んでいきました。今までのお稽古のうちで、一番うまかったわ。と、メグが言うと、ベスも、ジョー姉さん、どうしてこんな立派なものが書けるの？それに、お芝居も上手だわ。それほどでもないけど、この、魔女の呪いは、少しはいいかもしれないわ。それはそうと、シェイクスピアの、マクベスがやってみたいのよ。と言って、目の前にちらつくは探検家。と、有名な悲劇役者の仕草を真似、目の玉を光らし、虚空をつかんで言いました。すると、メグが叫びました。あら、フォークに刺して焼いてるのは、パンじゃなくて、お母さんのスリッパよ。なるほど、スリッパが火にかかっていました。ベスは、お稽古を見て夢中だったのです。みんなは大笑いしました。ずいぶん楽しそうね。と、戸口でお母さんの声がしました。ネズミ色の街灯を着て、流行遅れのボンネットをかぶったお母さんも、娘たちの目には、この世で並びない、素晴らしい人として映りました。今日は別に何にもなかったの？お母さんは、明日送り出す慰問箱の支度で忙しくて、ご飯までに帰れなかったの。ベス、どなたかお見えになった？メグ、風邪はどう？ジョー、 あなたはひどく疲れているのね。さあさあ、みんな来て、キッスしてちょうだい。
While making these maternal inquiries, Mrs. March got her wet things off, her warm slippers on, and sitting down in the easy chair, drew Amy to her lap, preparing to enjoy the happiest hour of her busy day. The girls flew about, trying to make things comfortable, each in her own way. Meg arranged the tea table, Jo brought wood and set chairs, dropping, overturning, and clattering everything she touched. Beth trotted to and from between parlor kitchen, quiet and busy, while Amy gave directions to everyone, as she sat with her hands folded. As they gathered about the table, Mrs. March said, with a particularly happy face, "I've got a treat for you after supper." A quick, bright smile went round like a streak of sunshine. Beth clapped her hands, regardless of the biscuit she held, and Jo tossed up her napkin, crying, "A letter! A letter! 3 cheers for Father! Yes, a nice long letter. He is well, and thinks he shall get through the cold season better than we feared. He sends all sorts of loving wishes for Christmas, and an especial message to you girls," said Mrs. March, patting her pocket as if she had got a treasure there. "Hurry and get done. Don't stop to cork your little finger and simper over your plate, Amy," cried Jo, choking on her tea and dropping her bread, butter side down, on the carpet in her haste to get at the treat. Beth ate no more, but crept away to sit in her shadowy corner and brood over the delight to come, till the others were ready. "I think it was so splendid in Father to go as chaplain when he was too old to be drafted, and not strong enough for a soldier," said Meg warmly. "Don't I wish I could go as a drummer, a vivon, what's its name? Or a nurse, so I could be near him and help him," exclaimed Jo, with a groan.
マーチ夫人は濡れた街灯を脱ぎ、暖かいスリッパを履き、ソファーに腰を下ろして、エミーを膝に乗せ、多忙な一日の一番楽しい時を楽しむのでした。メグとジョーとベスは、早速飛び回って、食事の支度をし、すべて整うと、みんなテーブルの周りにつきました。晩ご飯が済んだら、みんなにお土産をあげますよ。さっと、明るい微笑みがみんなの顔を輝かしました。ジョーは、ナフキンを放り上げて叫びました。手紙だ、手紙だ。お父さん、万歳。ええ、いいお便りです。お父さんは、お達者で、案じていたほどでもなく、この寒い冬を元気でお過ごしなされそうですって。お母さんは、そう言って、まるで宝物でも入っているように、ポケットを叩いてみせました。さあ、もうゆるゆる食事なんかしていられません。パンを床に落としたり、お茶にむせたりして大変でした。さあ、それでは、お手紙を読んであげましょうね。みんなは、ストーブの前に集まりました。お母さんはソファーにかけました。
"It must be very disagreeable to sleep in a tent, and eat all sorts of bad-tasting things, and drink out of a tin mug," sighed Amy. "When will he come home, Mommy?" asked Beth, with a little quiver in her voice. "Not for many months, dear, unless he is sick. He will stay and do his work faithfully as long as he can, and we won't ask for him back a minute sooner than he can be spared. Now come and hear the letter." They all drew to the fire, Mother in the big chair with Beth at her feet, Meg and Amy perched on either arm of the chair, and Jo leaning on the back, where no one would see any sign of emotion if the letter should happen to be touching. Very few letters were written in those hard times that were not touching, especially those which fathers sent home. In this one little was said of the hardships endured, the dangers faced, or the homesickness conquered. It was a cheerful, hopeful letter, full of lively descriptions of camp life, marches, and military news, and only at the end did the writer's heart overflow with fatherly love and longing for the little girls at home. "Give them all of my dear love and a kiss. Tell them I think of them by day, pray for them by night, and find my best comfort in their affection at all times. A year seems very long to wait before I see them, but remind them that while we wait we may all work, so that these hard days need not be wasted. I know they will remember all I said to them, that they will be loving children to you, will do their duty faithfully, fight their bosom enemies bravely, and conquer themselves so beautifully that when I come back to them I may be fonder and prouder than ever of my little women. Everybody sniffed when they came to that part. Jo wasn't ashamed of the great tear that dropped off the end of her nose, and Amy never minded the rumpling of her curls as she hid her face on her mother's shoulder and sobbed out, "I am a selfish girl. But I'll truly try to be better, so he mayn't be disappointed in me by and by."
こういう非常の時の手紙は、強い感動を与えるものですが、この手紙もそうで、危険に身をさらしたとか、辛いとかということは、少しも書いてなく、露営、進軍、宣教などが生き生きとした筆で書かれ、楽しく希望に満ちていましたが、最後のところで大きな感動を与えました。娘たちに私の愛とキスを与えてください。昼は娘たちのことを思い、夜は娘たちのために祈り、日夜娘たちの愛情のうちに慰めを見出しています。娘たちと会うまでの1年は長く思われるが、待ちわびるその間に、互いに仕事に努め、日々を無駄にしないようにとお告げください。娘たちは、御身には愛すべき子供であり、忠実に義務を行い、心中の敵と勇ましく戦い、見事に打ち勝って、私が凱旋の時には、以前にも増して愛らしく、誇りうるように成長しているように、出発の時に申し聞かせたことを、すべてよく記憶していると思います。ここまで来ると、みんな花をすすり始めました。涙を止めることはできません。
We all will, cried Meg. I think too much of my looks and hate to work, but won't any more, if I can help it. I'll try and be what he loves to call me, a little woman, and not be rough and wild, but do my duty here instead of wanting to be somewhere else, said Jo, thinking that keeping her temper at home was a much harder task than facing a rebel or two down south. Beth said nothing, but wiped away her tears with a blue army sock and began to knit with all her might, losing no time in doing the duty that lay nearest her, while she resolved in her quiet little soul to be all that Father hoped to find her when the year brought round the happy. Coming home, Mrs. March broke the silence that followed Jo's words, by saying in her cheery voice, "Do you remember how you used to play Pilgrim's Progress when you were little things? Nothing delighted you more than to have me tie my piece bags on your backs for burdens, give you hats and sticks and rolls of paper, and let you travel through the house from the cellar, which was the city of destruction, up, to the housetop, where you hid all the lovely things you could collect to make a celestial city. What fun it was, especially going by the lions, fighting Apollyon, and passing through the valley where the hobgoblins were," said Jo. "I like the place where the bundles fell off and tumbled downstairs," said Meg. "I don't remember much about it, except that I was afraid of the cellar in the dark entry, and always liked the cake and milk we had up at the top. If I wasn't too old for such things, I'd rather like to play it over again," said Amy, who began to talk of renouncing childish things. At the mature age of 12.
私わがままだったわ。お父さんが失望なさらないように、いい子になります。と、エミーが言いますと、メグが、みんないい子になりましょう。私見栄ばかり気にして、働くこと、嫌いだったわ。もうやめるわ。と、叫びました。私も、いい子になって乱暴な真似、よすわ。どこかへ行きたいなんて思わずに、家で自分の務めをするわ。ジョーは、家でおとなしくしてるのは、敵一人や二人に立ち向かうより難しいと思いながら言いました。ベスは、黙っていましたが、青い軍用靴下でそっと涙を拭き、身近の義務を果たすための時間を無駄にしまいとして、 せっせと編みました。お母さんは、ジョーの言葉に続いた沈黙を、快活な声で破りました。あなたたちが小さかった時、巡礼ごっこの遊びをしたことを覚えていますか？みんな背中に、あたしの小切れの袋を背負って、帽子をかぶり杖をつき、巻いた紙を持って、破滅の死の地下室から、日の照っている屋根の上まで行き、そこで天国を作るために、いろいろな美しいものをいただくくらい嬉しいことはなかったでしょう。みんなは、その時のいろんな出来事を思い出して話しましたが、エミーまでが、もうこんなに大きくなっては、あんな遊びできないというのを咎めて、お母さんは言いました。
We never are too old for this, my dear, because it is a play we are playing all the time in one way or another. Our burdens are here, our road is before us, and the longing for goodness and happiness is the guide that leads us through many troubles and mistakes to the peace which is a true celestial city. Now, my little pilgrims, suppose you begin again, not in play, but in earnest, and see how far on you can get before father comes home. Really, mother? Where are our bundles? Asked Amy, who was a very literal young lady. Each of you told what your burden was just now, except Beth. I rather think she hasn't got any, said her mother. Yes, I have. Mine is dishes and dusters, and envying girls with nice pianos, and being afraid of people. Beth's bundle was such a funny one that everybody wanted to laugh, but nobody did, for it would have hurt her feelings very much. Let us do it, said Meg thoughtfully. It is only another name for trying to be good, and the story may help us, for though we do want to be good, it's hard work and we forget, and don't do our best. We were in the slough of despond tonight, and Mother came and pulled us out as help did in the book. We ought to have our roll of directions, like Christian. What shall we do about that? Asked Joe, delighted with the fancy which lent a little romance to the very dull task of doing her duty. Look under your pillows Christmas morning, and you will find your guidebook, replied Mrs. March.
いいえ、年を取りすぎてはいません。私たちは、まあお芝居をしているようなものです。荷物はここに、道は目の前にあります。良いことと、幸せを求める心が、たくさんの苦労や過ちの中を通り抜けて、本当の天国、言い換えれば平和に導いてくれるのです。さあ、小さい巡礼さんたち、今度はお芝居遊びではなく本気でやって、お父さんがお帰りになるまでに、どのあたりまで巡礼ができるか、やってみてはどう？お母さん、それで荷物ってどこにありますの？と、エミーが尋ねました。ベスのほかはみんなが自分の荷物が何か、言いましたよ。ベスはきっと何もないのでしょう。いいえ、ありますが、あたしのはお皿とはたきと、いいピアノを持っている娘を羨ましがることですわ。それでは、みんなでしましょう。巡礼ごっこというのは、良い人になろうと努めることね。メグは、考え込むように、そう言いました。あたしたちは、今夜は絶望の沼にいたのね。するとお母さんが来て、あの本の中で救助隊がやったように、引き上げてくだすったんです。だけど、掟の巻物をどうしましょう。ジョーが、そう言うと、お母さんが答えました。クリスマスの朝、枕の下をご覧なさい。見つかるでしょうよ。
They talked over the new plan while old Hannah cleared the table, then out came the 4 little work baskets, and the needles flew as the girls made sheets for Aunt March. It was uninteresting sewing, but tonight no one grumbled. They adopted Joe's plan of dividing the long seams into 4 parts, and calling the quarters Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, and in that way got on capitally, especially when they talked about the different countries as they stitched their way through them. At 9 they stopped work, and sang, as usual, before they went to bed. No one but Beth could get much music out of the old piano, but she had a way of softly touching the yellow keys and making a pleasant accompaniment to the simple songs they sang. Meg had a voice like a flute, and she and her mother led the little choir. Amy chirped like a cricket, and Jo wandered through the airs at her own sweet will, always coming out at the wrong place with a croak or a quaver that spoiled the most pensive tune. They had always done this from the time they could lisp. Crinkle, crinkle, it'll tar, and it had become a household custom, for the mother was a born singer. The first sound in the morning was her voice as she went about the house singing like a lark, and the last sound at night was the same cheery sound, for the girls never grew too old for that familiar lullaby.
バーヤのハンナがテーブルを片付けている間に、4人の少女たちは新しい計画について話し合い、それからマーチおばさんの敷布を作るために4つの小さな仕事かごが持ち出され、せっせと針を運ぶのでしたが、今夜はこの面白くない仕事に誰も不平を言いませんでした。9時に仕事を辞めて、いつもの通り、終わる前に歌を合唱しました。ベスはオンボロピアノで、心よい伴奏をしました。メグは笛のような声で、お母さんと2人で、この合唱隊をリードしました。姉妹たちは、この歌を、キラリキラリ、ちっちゃな、星様、と、回らぬ舌で歌った頃から、未だに続けています。お母さんは生まれつき歌が上手なので、これが行事の一つとなったわけでした。朝、まず聞こえるのは、家の中をひばりのように歌うお母さんの声で、晩に聞こえる最後の声も同じ楽しいその声でした。姉妹たちはいくつになっても、その懐かしい子守歌を聞き飽きるということはありませんでした。
Chapter 2 A Merry Christmas. Jo was the first to wake in the gray dawn of Christmas morning. No stockings hung at the fireplace, and for a moment she felt as much disappointed as she did long ago, when her little sock fell down because it was crammed so full of goodies. Then she remembered her mother's promise and, slipping her hand under her pillow, drew out a little crimson-covered book. She knew it very well, for it was that beautiful old story of the best life ever lived, and Jo felt that it was a true guidebook for any pilgrim going on a long journey. She woke Meg with a Merry Christmas, and bade her see what was under her pillow. A green-covered book appeared, with the same picture inside, and a few words written by their mother, which made their one present very precious in their eyes. Presently Beth and Amy woke to rummage and find their little books also, one dove-colored, the other blue, and all sat looking at and talking about them, while the east grew rosy with the coming day. In spite of her small vanities, Margaret had a sweet and pious nature, which unconsciously influenced her sisters, especially Jo, who loved her very tenderly, and obeyed her because her advice was so gently given. "Girls," said Meg seriously, looking from the tumbled head beside her to the two little night-capped ones in the room beyond, "Mother wants us to read and love and mind these books, and we must begin at once. We used to be faithful about it, but since Father went away and all this war trouble unsettled us, we have neglected many things. You can do as you please, but I shall keep my book on the table here and read a little every morning as soon as I wake, for I know it will do me good and help me through the day." Then she opened her new book and began to read. Jo put her arm round her and, leaning cheek to cheek, read also, with the quiet expression so seldom seen on her restless face.
第2、楽しいクリスマス。クリスマスの朝、まだほの暗い明け方に、ジョーが一番先に目を覚ました。ジョーは、お母さんとの約束を思い出して、枕の下へ手を差し込み、小さい赤い表紙の本を引き出しました。それはこの世で最も優れた生活をした人の美しい物語で、良い道案内だと思いました。ジョーは、クリスマスおめでとう、と言ってメグを起こし、枕の下を見てごらんなさいと言いました。ありました。やはり、 赤い絵のある緑の表紙の本で、お母さんの手で短い言葉が書かれていました。間もなく、ベスとエミーが目を覚まし、枕の下に本を見つけました。一冊は鳩羽色、一冊は空色の表紙でした。みんなは起き直り、本を眺めて話し合いましたが、そのうちに東の空がバラ色に染まってきました。メグが言いました。毎朝目が覚めたら少しずつ読んで、その日一日、私を助けてもらいましょう。
How good Meg is. Come, Amy, let's do as they do. I'll help you with the hard words, and they'll explain things if we don't understand, whispered Beth, very much impressed by the pretty books and her sister's example. I'm glad mine is blue, said Amy. And then the rooms were very still while the pages were softly turned, and the winter sunshine crept in to touch the bright heads and serious faces with a Christmas greeting. Where is Mother? Asked Meg, as she and Joe ran down to thank her for their gifts, half an hour later. Goodness only knows. Some poor creetur came a-beggin', and your ma went straight off to see what was needed. There never was such a woman for givin' away victuals and drink, clothes and firin', replied Hannah, who had lived with the family since Meg was born, and was considered by them all more as a friend than a servant. She will be back soon, I think, so fry your cakes, and have everything ready, said Meg, looking over the presents which were collected in a basket and kept under the sofa, ready to be produced at the proper time. Why, where's Amy's bottle of cologne? She added, as the little flask did not appear. She took it out a minute ago, and went off with it to put a ribbon on it, or some such notion, replied Joe, dancing about the room to take the first stiffness off the new army slippers. How nice my handkerchiefs look, don't they? Hannah washed and ironed them for me, and I marked them all myself, said Beth, looking proudly at the somewhat uneven letters which had cost her such labor. Bless the child. She's gone and put Mother on them instead of em. March. How funny, cried Joe, taking one up.
メグが読み始めると、ジョーは片手をメグの体にかけ、頬をすり寄せました。他の二人も静かにページを繰りました。30分ばかりして、メグはジョーと一緒に、お母さんにプレゼントのお礼を言いに階下へ駆け下りていきました。奥様は、どこかの貧乏な人がおもらいに来たので、何かいるものを見にすぐお出かけになりました。奥様みたいに、食物や着物や焚き木までおやりになる方はありませんよ。と、ハンナが答えました。ハンナは、メグが生まれてからこの家族と一緒に暮らしてきて、女中というよりは友達として扱われているのです。すぐにお帰りになると思うわ。だから、お菓子を焼いて、すっかり用意しておいてね。と、メグはカゴに入れてソファーの下に隠しておいたプレゼントを、いざという時に取り出せるようにしてから。あら、エミーのコロン水の瓶は？エミーがリボンをかけるとかと言って持って行ったわ。と、ジョーが言いました。ねえ、あたしのハンケチいいでしょう。ハンナが洗ってアイロンをかけてくれたのよ。マークはあたしがつけたの。とベスは、縫い取りの文字を誇らしげに眺めました。まあ、この子は M マーチでなくマザーなんて縫い取りして、おかしいね。と、ジョーが言うと。
Isn't that right? I thought it was better to do it so, because Meg's initials are MM, and I don't want anyone to use these but Mommy, said Beth, looking troubled. It's all right, dear, and a very pretty idea, quite sensible too. For no one can ever mistake now. It will please her very much, I know, said Meg, with a frown for Joe and a smile for Beth. There's Mother. Hide the basket, quick, cried Joe, as a door slammed and steps sounded in the hall. Amy came in hastily, and looked rather abashed when she saw her sisters all waiting for her. Where have you been, and what are you hiding behind you? Asked Meg, surprised to see, by her hood and cloak, that lazy Amy had been out so early. Don't laugh at me, Joe. I didn't mean anyone should know till the time came. I only meant to change the little bottle for a big one, and I gave all my money to get it, and I'm truly trying not to be selfish anymore." As she spoke, Amy showed the handsome flask which replaced the cheap one, and looked so earnest and humble in her little effort to forget herself that Meg hugged her on the spot, and Joe pronounced her a trump, while Beth ran to the window, and picked her finest rose to ornament the stately bottle. You see, I felt ashamed of my present, after reading and talking about being good this morning, so I ran round the corner and changed it the minute I was up, and I'm so glad, for mine is the handsomest now. Another bang of the street door sent the basket under the sofa, and the girls to the table, eager for breakfast. "Merry Christmas, Mommy." Many of them. "Thank you for our books. We read some, and mean to every day," they all cried in chorus. "Merry Christmas, little daughters. I'm glad you began at once, and hope you will keep on. But I want to say one word before we sit down."
ベスは困ったような顔をして。いけないの。M マーチだと姉さんも同じだから。いいのよ。それなら間違いっこないから。きっとお母さんの気に入るわ。と、メグはジョーには顔をしかめ、ベスには笑顔を見せて言いました。その時扉の音がしたので、ジョーは、そら、お母さんだ。カゴを早く隠しなさいよ。エミーが急いで入ってきました。どこへ行っていたの？後ろに隠しているのなーに？メグは、怠け者のエミーが朝早く外出してきたのを見てびっくりして尋ねました。笑っちゃいや。あたし小瓶を大瓶に変えてきたの。これでお金はないわ。もう欲張りはやめにするのよ。エミーの可愛い努力に感じて、メグは早速彼女を抱きしめ、ジョーは窓へ行き、自分の一番いいバラの花を取ってきてその瓶を飾りました。また扉の音がしました。カゴはソファーの下に隠され、姉妹たちはテーブルに着きました。お母さんが来ると姉妹たちは口を揃えて言いました。クリスマスおめでとう。本をありがとうございました。もう読み始めました。毎日読もうと思います。皆さん、クリスマスおめでとう。早速読み始めて嬉しく思いますよ。続けて読むようになさいね。
Not far away from here lies a poor woman with a little newborn baby. 6 children are huddled into one bed to keep from freezing, for they have no fire. There is nothing to eat over there, and the oldest boy came to tell me they were suffering hunger and cold. My girls, will you give them your breakfast as a Christmas present? They were all unusually hungry, having waited nearly an hour, and for a minute no one spoke, only a minute, for Joe exclaimed impetuously, "I'm so glad you came before we began. May I go and help carry the things to the poor little children?" asked Beth eagerly. "I shall take the cream and the muffins," added Amy, heroically giving up the article she most liked. Meg was already covering the buckwheats, and piling the bread into one big plate. "I thought you'd do it," said Mrs. March, smiling as if satisfied. "You shall all go and help me, and when we come back we will have bread and milk for breakfast, and make it up at dinner time." They were soon ready, and the procession set out. Fortunately it was early, and they went through back streets, so few people saw them, and no one laughed at the queer party. A poor, bare, miserable room it was, with broken windows, no fire, ragged bedclothes, a sick mother, wailing baby, and a group of pale, hungry children cuddled under one old quilt, trying to keep warm. How the big eyes stared and the blue lips smiled as the girls went in. "Ach, mein Gott! It is good angels come to us," said the poor woman, crying for joy. "Funny angels in hoods and mittens," said Joe, and set them to laughing. In a few minutes it really did seem as if kind spirits had been at work there. Hannah, who had carried wood, made a fire, and stopped up the broken panes with old hats and her own cloak. Mrs. March gave the mother tea and gruel, and comforted her with promises of help, while she dressed the little baby as tenderly as if it had been her own. The girls meantime spread the table, set the children round the fire, and fed them like so many hungry birds, laughing, talking, and trying to understand the funny broken English.
ところで、食事の前に一言言いたいことがあります。すぐ近くに、赤ちゃんを産んだ貧乏な女の人がいます。火の気がないので、6人の子供たちが凍えないように、一つのベッドに抱き合って寝ています。それに、何も食べ物がないので、一番上の子が寒くてひもじくてとても苦しんでいると言いに来ました。皆さん、あなた方の朝ごはんをクリスマスのプレゼントにあげませんか？みんなは1時間近くも待っていたので、ひどくお腹が空いていたので、ちょっとの間、黙っていました。が、ジョーが勇ましく叫びました。食べないうちにお母さんが帰っていらして、本当によかった。ベスはご飯を運ぶお手伝いをしたいと言い、エミーはクリームとかる焼きを持って行ってあげると言いました。その2つともエミーの一番好きなものでした。メグは早くもそばを包み、パンを大きな皿に盛りました。お母さんは満足そうに微笑みながら言いました。きっと皆さんは賛成すると思っていました。さあ、来て手伝ってください。帰ったらパンとミルクで朝ごはんを済ませて、夕飯にその埋め合わせをしましょう。すぐ支度をして、みんなで出かけました。行ってみて驚きました。なんと哀れな部屋でしょう。窓は破れ火の気はなく、布団はボロボロでした。お母さんは病気で、赤ん坊は泣き、青い顔のひもじい子供たちは一枚の布団にくるまって固まっていました。みんなが入っていくと、子供たちは目を大きく見張り、青ざめた唇に微笑みを浮かべました。
Das ist gut. Die Engelkinder, cried the poor things as they ate and warmed their purple hands at the comfortable blaze. The girls had never been called angel children before, and thought it very agreeable, especially Jo, who had been considered a Sancho ever since she was born. That was a very happy breakfast, though they didn't get any of it. And when they went away, leaving comfort behind, I think there were not in all the city 4 merrier people than the hungry little girls who gave away their breakfasts and contented themselves with bread and milk on Christmas morning. That's loving our neighbor better than ourselves, and I like it, said Meg, as they set out their presents while their mother was upstairs collecting clothes for the poor Hummels. Not a very splendid show, but there was a great deal of love done up in the few little bundles, and the tall vase of red roses, white chrysanthemums, and trailing vines, which stood in the middle, gave quite an elegant air to the table. She's coming. Strike up, Beth. Open the door, Amy. 3 cheers for Mommy, cried Jo, prancing about while Meg went to conduct Mother to the seat of honor. Beth played her gayest march, Amy threw open the door, and Megan acted escort with great dignity. Mrs. March was both surprised and touched, and smiled with her eyes full as she examined her presents and read the little notes which accompanied them. The slippers went on at once, a new handkerchief was slipped into her pocket, well scented with Amy's cologne, the rose was fastened in her bosom, and the nice gloves were pronounced a perfect fit. There was a good deal of laughing and kissing and explaining, in the simple, loving fashion which makes these home festivals so pleasant at the time, so sweet to remember long afterward, and then all fell to work.
ああ、神様、天使たちがいらした。と、その哀れな女は、嬉し泣きに泣きながら叫びました。ジョーは、頭をかけ手袋をはめたおかしな天使でしょう。と言って、家中の者を笑わせました。たちまち、この家に優しい精霊が働き出したように思われました。焚き木を運んできたハンナは火を起こし、古い帽子や自分の肩掛けで窓の破れを塞ぎました。お母さんは母親にお茶や粥を与え、赤ん坊を自分の子供みたいに着物を着せ、これからもお世話をしますと約束して慰めました。姉妹たちは その間にテーブルの支度をし、子供たちを炉の周りに座らせ、お腹の空いている小鳥たちを養うように食べさせました。ああ、おいしい、子供の天使と、子供たちは食べながら言って、紫色に凍えた手を温かい火で温めました。
The morning charities and ceremonies took so much time that the rest of the day was devoted to preparations for the evening festivities. Being still too young to go often to the theater, and not rich enough to afford any great outlay for private performances, the girls put their wits to work, and necessity being the mother of invention, made whatever they needed. Very clever were some of their productions: pasteboard guitars, antique lamps made of old-fashioned butter boats covered with silver paper, gorgeous robes of old cotton, glittering with tin spangles from a pickle factory, and armor covered with the same useful diamond-shaped bits left in sheets when the lids of preserve pots were cut out. The big chamber was the scene of many innocent revels. No gentlemen were admitted, so Jo played male parts to her heart's content and took immense satisfaction in a pair of russet leather boots given her by a friend, who knew a lady who knew an actor. These boots, an old foil, and a slashed doublet once used by an artist for some picture, were Jo's chief treasures and appeared on all occasions. The smallness of the company made it necessary for the two principal actors to take several parts apiece, and they certainly deserved some credit for the hard work they did in learning 3 or 4 different parts, whisking in and out of various costumes, and managing the stage besides. It was excellent drill for their memories, a harmless amusement, and employed many hours which otherwise would have been idle, lonely, or spent in less profitable society.
帰ってから、姉妹たちはパンとミルクしか食べませんでしたが、それは楽しい朝ごはんでした。おそらくこの町で、この少女たちより幸福であった人はなかったでしょう。お母さんが少し遅れて帰ってきたとき、プレゼントはもう用意され、ベスの陽気な行進曲とともにメグがお母さんを丁寧に儲けの席につけました。お母さんは、微笑みをたたえてプレゼントについている札を読み、スリッパをすぐに履き、ハンケチにコロン水をかけて隠しにしまい、バラの花を胸に刺し、きれいな手袋をはめました。それから、楽しい談笑と口づけが続き、良い思い出としてみんなの心に残ることばかりでした。やがて、めいめい仕事を始めました。仕事は晩のお芝居の支度で、金をかけずにあり合わせのもので、気の利いた小道具や衣装を作るのでした。
On Christmas night, a dozen girls piled onto the bed which was the dress circle, and sat before the blue and yellow chintz curtains in a most flattering state of expectancy. There was a good deal of rustling and whispering behind the curtain, a trifle of lamp smoke, and an occasional giggle from Amy, who was apt to get hysterical in the excitement of the moment. Presently a bell sounded, the curtains flew apart, and the operatic tragedy began. A gloomy wood, according to the one playbill, was represented by a few shrubs in pots, green baize on the floor, and a cave in the distance. This cave was made with a clothes horse for a roof, bureaus for walls, and in it was a small furnace in full blast, with a black pot on it and an old witch bending over it. The stage was dark and the glow of the furnace had a fine effect, especially as real steam issued from the kettle when the witch took off the cover. A moment was allowed for the first thrill to subside, then Hugo, the villain, stalked in with a clanking sword at his side, a slouching hat, black beard, mysterious cloak, and the boots. After pacing to and from in much agitation, he struck his forehead, and burst out in a wild strain, singing of his hatred for Rodrigo, his love for Zara, and his pleasing resolution to kill the one and win the other. The gruff tones of Hugo's voice, with an occasional shout when his feelings overcame him, were very impressive, and the audience applauded the moment he paused for breath. Bowing with the air of one accustomed to public praise, he stole to the cavern and ordered Hagar to come forth with a commanding, What ho, minion! I need thee. Up came Meg, with grey horsehair hanging about her face, a red and black robe, a staff, and cabalistic signs upon her cloak. Hugo demanded a potion to make Zara adore him, and one to destroy Rodrigo. Hagar, in a fine dramatic melody, promised both, and proceeded to call up the spirit who would bring the love philter.
その晩、招かれた10人余りの少女たちが上等席のベッドの上に並びました。間もなくベルが鳴り幕が上がりました。間の森です。鉢植えやタンスを利用して森と洞穴を表しました。魔女が洞穴の炉にかかっている鍋を覗き込んでいると、圧巻ユーゴーが腰の剣をガチャつかせて登場しました。ユーゴーはロデリゴへの憎しみとザラへの愛を歌い、ロデリゴを殺してザラを手に入れたい決心を述べ、洞穴へ忍び寄り、おい、女、御用だぞ、と言ってハーガーに出てくるように命じました。
Hither, hither, from thy home, airy sprite, I bid thee come. Born of roses, fed on dew, charms and potions canst thou brew? Bring me here, with elfin speed, the fragrant philter which I need. Make it sweet and swift and strong, Spirit, answer now my song. A soft strain of music sounded, and then at the back of the cave appeared a little figure in cloudy white, with glittering wings, golden hair, and a garland of roses on its head. Waving a wand, it sang. Hither I come. From my airy home. Afar in the silver moon. Take the magic spell. And use it well. Or its power will vanish soon. And dropping a small, gilded bottle at the witch's feet, the spirit vanished. Another chant from Hagar produced another apparition, not a lovely one, for with a bang an ugly black imp appeared and, having croaked a reply, tossed a dark bottle at Hugo and disappeared with a mocking laugh.
メグは白い馬の毛を顔に垂らし、赤と黒の衣をまとい、杖を持って現れます。ユーゴーが愛の麻薬と死の麻薬を求めると、ハーガーは与えることを約束し、愛の麻薬を持ってくるように歌で妖精を呼びました。すると、柔らかな音楽につれて、洞穴の影からキラキラした翼をつけ、金髪にバラの花冠のかわいい妖精が現れ、愛の麻薬を入れた金色の瓶を落として姿を消します。そこで、ハーガーがもう一度歌うと、ものすごい響きとともに真っ黒な高2が現れ、しゃがれ声で返事をしたかと思うと、黒色の瓶をユーゴーに投げつけて姿を消しました。するとハーガーは、ユーゴーに、昔自分の友人を2、3人殺したことがあるから、自分は彼の計画の邪魔をするつもりだと言います。かくて、幕は下がりました。
Having warbled his thanks and put the potions in his boots, Hugo departed, and Hagar informed the audience that as he had killed a few of her friends in times past, she had cursed him, and intends to thwart his plans, and be revenged on him. Then the curtain fell, and the audience reposed and ate candy while discussing the merits of the play. A good deal of hammering went on before the curtain rose again, but when it became evident what a masterpiece of stage carpentry had been got up, no one murmured at the delay. It was truly superb. A tower rose to the ceiling, halfway up appeared a window with a lamp burning in it, and behind the white curtain appeared Zara in a lovely blue and silver dress, waiting for Rodrigo. He came in gorgeous array, with plumed cap, red cloak, chestnut lovelocks, a guitar, and the boots, of course. Kneeling at the foot of the tower, he sang a serenade in melting tones. Zara replied and, after a musical dialogue, consented to fly. Then came the grand effect of the play. Rodrigo produced a rope ladder, with 5 steps to it, threw up one end, and invited Zara to descend. Timidly she crept from her lattice, put her hand on Rodrigo's shoulder, and was about to leap gracefully down when alas for Zara. She forgot her train. It caught in the window, the tower tottered, leaned forward, fell with a crash, and buried the unhappy lovers in the ruins. A universal shriek arose as the russet boots waved wildly from the wreck and a golden head emerged, exclaiming, "I told you so! I told you so!" With wonderful presence of mind, Don Pedro, the cruel sire, rushed in, dragged out his daughter, with a hasty aside.
第2幕の舞台は立派でした。お城の塔が高くそびえ、窓にランプが灯っていました。青と白の衣をつけてザラが現れ、ロデリゴが来るのを待っていると、間もなく、羽飾りのある帽子をかぶり赤い街灯を着てギターを持ったロデリゴが来て、塔の下で優しくセレナーデを歌いました。ザラは、城を抜け出すことを歌で答えます。そこで、ロデリゴは縄ばしごをかけ、ザラはそれを伝って降りるのでした。ところが、とんだことが起こりました。それはザラが、衣の裾の長いことを忘れ、ロデリゴの肩に手をかけて降りようとしたとき、裾が絡まり塔はすごい音とともに倒れ、二人はその下敷きになったのです。
Don't laugh. Act as if it was all right. And, ordering Rodrigo up, banished him from the kingdom with wrath and scorn. Though decidedly shaken by the fall from the tower upon him, Rodrigo defied the old gentleman and refused to stir. This dauntless example fired Zara. She also defied her sire, and he ordered them both to the deepest dungeons of the castle. A stout little retainer came in with chains and led them away, looking very much frightened and evidently forgetting the speech he ought to have made. Act third was the castle hall, and here Hagar appeared, having come to free the lovers and finish Hugo. She hears him coming and hides, sees him put the potions into 2 cups of wine and bid the timid little servant, bear them to the captives in their cells, and tell them I shall come anon. The servant takes Hugo aside to tell him something, and Hagar changes the cups for 2 others which are harmless. Ferdinando, the minion, carries them away, and Hagar puts back the cup which holds the poison meant for Rodrigo. Hugo, getting thirsty after a long warble, drinks it, loses his wits, and after a good deal of clutching and stamping, falls flat and dies, while Hagar informs him what she has done in a song of exquisite power and melody. This was a truly thrilling scene, though some persons might have thought that the sudden tumbling down of a quantity of long red hair rather marred the effect of the villain's death. He was called before the curtain, and with great propriety appeared, leading Hagar, whose singing was considered more wonderful than all the rest of the performance put together.
芝居はめちゃめちゃになりそうでしたが、気を利かしたドンペデロが飛び込んできて、笑っちゃダメ、知らん顔をしてやるのよ、と言いながら、自分の娘のザラを素早く引き出し、ロデリゴに向かって立てと命じ、怒りとあざけりを浴びせながら王国から追放するぞと宣告しました。ロデリゴは何をと、その老人を罵り、立ち退くことを拒みました。その勇ましい態度にザラも力を得て、父である領主に立てついたので、彼は2人を城の牢屋に放り込むことを命じますと、家来が黙って引き立てていきました。
Act fourth displayed the despairing Rodrigo on the point of stabbing himself because he has been told that Zara has deserted him. Just as the dagger is at his heart, a lovely song is sung under his window, informing him that Zara is true but in danger, and he can save her if he will. A key is thrown in, which unlocks the door, and in a spasm of rapture he tears off his chains and rushes away to find and rescue his lady love. Act fifth opened with a stormy scene between Zara and Don Pedro. He wishes her to go into a convent, but she won't hear of it, and after a touching appeal, is about to faint when Rodrigo dashes in and demands her hand. Don Pedro refuses, because he is not rich. They shout and gesticulate tremendously but cannot agree, and Rodrigo is about to bear away the exhausted Zara, when the timid servant enters with a letter and a bag from Hagar, who has mysteriously disappeared. The latter informs the party that she bequeaths untold wealth to the young pair and an awful doom to Don Pedro, if he doesn't make them happy. The bag is opened, and several quarts of tin money shower down upon the stage till it is quite glorified with the glitter. This entirely softens the stern sire. He consents without a murmur, all join in a joyful chorus, and the curtain falls upon the lovers kneeling to receive Don Pedro's blessing in attitudes of the most romantic grace. Tumultuous applause followed but received an unexpected check, for the cot bed, on which the dress circle was built, suddenly shut up and extinguished the enthusiastic audience. Rodrigo and Don Pedro flew to the rescue, and all were taken out unhurt, though many were speechless with laughter. The excitement had hardly subsided when Hannah appeared, with Mrs. March's compliments, and would the ladies walk down to supper.
第4幕、ロデリゴがザラに裏切られたと知って、絶望して胸に短刀を突き刺そうとします。その時部屋の下で歌が歌われ、ザラの心は変わらないが、今危ない目に遭っているから、ロデリゴにもし真心があるならザラを救い出せると告げます。ロデリゴは喜び、投げ与えられた鍵で扉を開け、鎖を断ち切って愛人を救いに走ります。第5幕は、ザラと父ドンベデロの激しい争いから始まります。父はザラを尼寺へやろうとしますが、ザラは聞き入れず、悲痛な訴えを続け、気絶しそうになった時、ロデリゴが来て結婚を求め、連れて行こうとします。父はロデリゴが金持ちでないのを理由に拒みます。そこへ、家来がハーガーからの手紙と袋を持ってきますが、手紙にはハーガーは、若い二人に遺言によって莫大な財産を与え、もしザラの父が若い二人の幸福を妨げるならば、その身に恐ろしい呪いがかかると書いてありました。そして、袋を開けると、ブリキの金貨がきらめきました。これで、顔面な領主の心も解け、若き二人の結婚を許したので、一同は楽しい合唱をして、感謝の祈りのうちに、愛する二人はザラの父の前にひざまずき、祝福を受けるところで幕が下りました。嵐のような喝采が起こりましたが、上等席のベッドが急に畳まれ、大騒ぎになりました。幸いに怪我もなく救い出されましたが、その騒ぎの収まらないうちに、女中のハンナが現れ、奥様が皆さんに、夕飯に開花へ来るようにとおっしゃってです。と、言いました。
This was a surprise even to the actors, and when they saw the table, they looked at one another in rapturous amazement. It was like Mommy to get up a little treat for them, but anything so fine as this was unheard of since the departed days of plenty. There was ice cream, actually 2 dishes of it, pink and white, and cake and fruit and distracting French bonbons and, in the middle of the table, 4 great bouquets of hothouse flowers. It quite took their breath away, and they stared first at the table and then at their mother, who looked as if she enjoyed it immensely. "Is it fairies?" asked Amy. "Santa Claus," said Beth. "Mother did it." And Meg smiled her sweetest, in spite of her gray beard and white eyebrows. "Aunt March had a good fit and sent the supper," cried Joe, with a sudden inspiration. "All wrong. Old Mr. Lawrence sent it," replied Mrs. March. "The Lawrence boy's grandfather. What in the world put such a thing into his head?" "We don't know him," exclaimed Meg. "Hannah told one of his servants about your breakfast party. He is an odd old gentleman, but that pleased him. He knew my father years ago, and he sent me a polite note this afternoon, saying he hoped I would allow him to express his friendly feeling toward my children by sending them a few trifles in honor of the day. I could not refuse, and so you have a little feast at night to make up for the bread and milk breakfast. That boy put it into his head, I know he did. He's a capital fellow, and I wish we could get acquainted. He looks as if he'd like to know us, but he is bashful, and Meg is so prim she won't let me speak to him when we pass," said Joe, as the plates went round, and the ice began to melt out of sight, with ohs and ahs of satisfaction.
これは不意打ちで、食卓を見たとき息が止まるほど驚きました。だって、アイスクリームが赤と白と2皿、お菓子、果物、フランスボンボン、そして食卓の上には温室咲きの大きな花束がありました。妖精が下すったのとエミー。するとベスは、サンタクロースよ、きっと。メグは白いひげを生やし、白い眉毛をつけたまま、お母様だわ、と言いました。ジョーは、マーチおばさまが素敵な思いつきで届けてくださったのよ、と言いました。お母さんはにっこり笑いながら、みんな違います。ローレンス様が下すったのです。ローレンスの坊ちゃんのおじいさまですって。どうしてでしょう。私たちをご存じないのに。と、メグが驚いて言いました。ハンナがローレンスさんの家の女中さんに今朝のことを話したのです。ローレンスさんはそれを感心なさって、丁寧な手紙で今日のお祝いにプレゼントをしたいと言って、およこしになったのです。坊ちゃんが思いついたんだわ。いい坊ちゃんだわ。お友達になりたいけど。と、ジョーが言いますと、それをきっかけに、ローレンス家の噂に花が咲きました。
You mean the people who live in the big house next door, don't you? Asked one of the girls. My mother knows old Mr. Lawrence, but says he's very proud and doesn't like to mix with his neighbors. He keeps his grandson shut up when he isn't riding or walking with his tutor, and makes him study very hard. We invited him to our party, but he didn't come. Mother says he's very nice, though he never speaks to us girls. Our cat ran away once, and he brought her back, and we talked over the fence, and were getting on capitally, all about cricket, and so on, when he saw Meg coming, and walked off. I mean to know him some day, for he needs fun, I'm sure he does, said Joe decidedly. I like his manners, and he looks like a little gentleman, so I've no objection to your knowing him, if a proper opportunity comes. He brought the flowers himself, and I should have asked him in, if I had been sure what was going on upstairs. He looked so wistful as he went away, hearing the frolic and evidently having none of his own. It's a mercy you didn't, Mother, laughed Joe, looking at her boots. But we'll have another play sometime that he can see. Perhaps he'll help act. Wouldn't that be jolly? I never had such a fine bouquet before. How pretty it is. And Meg examined her flowers with great interest. They are lovely. But Beth's roses are sweeter to me, said Mrs. March, smelling the half-dead posy in her belt. Beth nestled up to her, and whispered softly, I wish I could send my bunch to Father. I'm afraid he isn't having such a Merry Christmas as we are.
ローレンスさんは、お金持ちだがちょっと変わっていて、あまり付き合いもしませんが、坊ちゃんはいい子で、遊びに来たいらしいけど、はにかみ屋だもので、遊びに来れないらしいというようなことが話されました。すると、お母さんは、坊ちゃんは立派な紳士のようです。いい折があったらお友達になるといいと思います。この花は自分で持っていらっしゃいました。2階の騒ぎを耳にして、寂しそうに帰られたのです。では、いつか坊ちゃんが見てもいいお芝居をしましょう。と、ジョーが言いました。あたし花束なんかもらったことないわ。きれいね。と、メグは花束に見入っていました。その時、お母さんが、花束はかわいいけれど、ベスさんのバラはなおかわいい。と言って、胸に刺したベスのしぼみかけたバラを嗅ぎながら言いますと、ベスはお母さんに身をすり寄せて、あたし、花束をお父さんのところへお送りしたかったの。お父さんは、 私たちみたいに楽しいクリスマスをしてはいらっしゃらないでしょう。と小さい声で言いました。